very much. So good afternoon, all. My name is Pete Thomas. I am the founder of MySafetyConsultant.io, which is an advertising platform for safety consultants. And I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Intuity, which is an AI risk assessment platform. But for some of you on the call, the people that I know will know that I've been a health and safety professional for well over a decade. And a few years ago, I was really interested in technology and how technology can help us overcome some of the challenges that we've got in safety. So I set up My Safety Tech podcast, started interviewing a number of founders in the technology space, and that's how I got so excited about this subject and how I ended up working with Intuity. But we've all seen AI everywhere. And so this is some of the things that I'm going to go through today in this session. First of all, AI isn't new. It just got really, really loud. So AI itself has actually been around for probably around 50 years, right? But the thing is as some people have said to me, it just wasn't that sexy. It was like the equivalent of the formula that you would get in an Excel table, right? It's like it's really important. It does some good stuff, but it just wasn't that exciting. And LLMs have come along and completely changed public perception. Now, what I mean by LLMs is things like ChatGPT and Copilot and all of these other almost prompting tools, these large language models that you type something in and they give you this incredible answer. You know, it's like talking to someone with an incredible level of intelligence almost, or it seems that way. And in a way, these LLMs have done this phenomenal thing because they give us access to this incredible intelligence, but they've also, I guess, like, I want to say sullied the good name of AI, you know, this AI that we've had around for 50 years, that has been in, you know, in finance, in fintech, in science, in computing. And it's all these things from machine learning, and you get all these terms like AGI. But the truth of it is that AI is now everywhere. And in fact, someone told me the other day, they said they'd seen in a supermarket AI curated gin. And I had to ask the question, well, was gin broken in the first place? Like, why did we need to add AI to gin, for God's sake? Like, gin is good. I'm happy with gin. We don't need to change gin. And this is one of the things that I think about with safety. I think there's things that AI can do phenomenally well, but I also think there are things that we have to be cautious about with AI. And that's my intention for the presentation today. So as Lauren mentioned, there is a questions box at the bottom. Please ask any questions that you want. This is an interactive session. I will stop every so often and ask if there are any questions so far, and then I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. So the types of AI in safety then. Okay, let me talk about LLMs because we use this term large language models, first of all. And of course, the most famous of that is probably ChatGPT. Now, LLMs are absolutely phenomenal. When you ask them a question, 90% of the time it's going to give you a right answer, but 10% of the time it's going to give you a wrong answer. Don't quote me on that statistic, but I use them enough every single day to, and probably many of you have used LLMs to know when it's giving you a poor mistake. So for example, LLMs are really bad at doing maths, although I did notice yesterday that they're starting to get better. So don't ask LLMs to do your accounts for you, because I promise you it's going to get some things wrong. But one of the things about LLMs is they're trained using a variety of different sources. So for example, ChatGPT has been trained by scraping all of the information off the internet that it can get its hands on. And it doesn't necessarily care where that information has come from. Now that works if you want a really intelligent Google, but just as when you Google something, you know that you're likely to get a couple of bad results. It's exactly the same as that with large language models like ChatGPT. Because it's scraping off the internet, it regurgitates what it's seen on the internet just with a level of authority. So it basically says, this is absolutely right. And I've had this myself with LLMs where I've been asking it questions and I said, are you sure I can do this? For example, it was coding something on a computer. I'm like, you sure I can do this? It's not going to break something. Guess what? It broke something. And then ChatGPT went, whoops, we shouldn't have done that. I'm like, thanks very much. It's too late now. But the importance is we work in safety and lives depend on what we do. I hate to over dramatize it, but ultimately we can't afford to make mistakes in safety critical industries. So we can't use LLMs for safety critical functions, because if it makes a mistake, someone's life could be in danger, or it could seriously injure or hurt someone. And one of the reasons why it can make these mistakes is that because it's scraped the data from everywhere. I'll give you an example. Let's talk about British standards, for example. We all know and love good old British standards. BSI produce the British standards. They're licensed documents behind a paywall. And I can go online now and I can pay for those British standards to access them. If I go into ChatGPT and ask it a question and say, okay, what does BS 8214, which is the British standard for timber fire door sets, timber frame fire door sets, if I say, what does BS 8214 say about this? ChatGPT, I promise you, will give me an authoritative answer. It will say, BS 8214 says exactly this. Now, we know that ChatGPT can't access the British standard because it's behind a paywall. So where's it got that information from? It's probably got that information from a website where someone has written about that standard. So if I produce a website and say BS 8214 says, and that website becomes an authority on the subject, ChatGPT takes that as 100% accurate and then regurgitates that back. But I could be a complete idiot. I could have written anything on that website about BS 8214, and ChatGPT could be regurgitating the wrong thing back to me. And this is why it's fundamentally critical that we learn about the types of AI, where they work and where they don't. Now, there's been a lot of changes as well to AI in the past 12 months. In fact, they're saying that AI doubles in power every 6 months, which is just, it's difficult to comprehend where we're going to be in 6 months' time and where we're going to be in 12 months' time. But there has been a lot of changes. So one of the things that LLMs did around about a year ago when I started using them, well, maybe even longer, but is that they were very good at pulling text out of a document, right? So I could put a document into an LLM and say, what does this say? And it would pull the text out, but it would ignore things like nested tables, images, diagrams, photographs. It couldn't extract the data from that because it couldn't interact with it. It could only pull out text. Now, LLMs can pull out so much more information, and AI has the ability to extract information from images, from charts. And this is phenomenally powerful when you think about it, because a lot of our guidance in safety, I mean, we're talking about safety and risk, but actually let's take fire safety, for example. Take HM guides in fire safety. Most of the detail is in the images. Things like, safe distances on escape routes. Most of that will be contained within the images that they produce in the HM guides. So again, LLMs now have access to more of that information. And I've no doubt that this is going to get better and better. We've also got multimodal AI with photograph and videos, and there's some phenomenal companies doing some amazing things with this. Certainly like Protex, for example, Protex AI, in terms of integrating AI into CCTV systems. It's just incredible technology when you think about it. And this is really important because it starts to build up a picture of context. But I want to put this caveat on certain things like multimodal, because someone said to me, well, does that mean I can take a picture and then AI can produce a risk assessment for me? And it's like, well, yeah, up to a point, but then it's going to lose context. So how do you give the system more context, right? And I'll explain. Many of us will have done a managing safety course, or we'd have delivered a managing safety course, and we pull up on the screen those stock images where they've got a standard, I said typical, it seems like a terrible workplace, all these cartoon images with all of the accidents and all of the hazards, and your job is to spot all of the hazards, right? Now, if I put that into AI as an image and say, can you spot all the hazards? It do really well at spotting the hazards in terms of the diagram, but it doesn't know anything about where the company is. It doesn't know about what the company does. It doesn't know about, the number of staff or the types of, the training that the staff have had, or the implications of the work that they're doing, or, I don't know what their integrated management system says or what their safety management system says about it. It has none of that context. In simple terms, the explanation I normally provide is, if I'm stood on the side of the M5 and I take a picture of an excavation on the hard shoulder, and I say and all I've taken is a picture of a hole in the ground, and I say to AI, can you write me a risk assessment for this? It will do, but it will completely miss out the fact that there's the M5 behind me and there's trucks speeding past at 50, 60 miles an hour. Because if it doesn't know, if I haven't told it, it can't give me that answer. And this is one of the challenges with AI, is how do we get more context? How do we get more information in it? The other thing that's changed a lot over the past 12 months is this concept of AI agents, right? So at the moment, if I use ChatGPT, you'll see there's a little box and I write a prompt into it. And I'm kind of hoping you all know what I'm talking about. If you don't, then probably go and do some research on it, because I promise you the AI is not going away anytime soon, right? We're all kind of going to have to get used to it, really. But you have the little box and you can write a little prompt into it. AI, and then, by the way, and then the AI will respond to you. It will give you a prompt back. So let me give you an example. I can copy an email into ChatGPT and I can say, I want to write a response to Paul. Please write something along these lines. And AI will then, underneath, will produce an email back that I can cut, copy, and paste and send to Paul. AI agents remove the human interaction. So now I can say to the AI agent, can you email Paul for me? Tell him this, please. And what that does is it removes the human check in the process. Now, this is AI. This is not necessarily safety, but you can see how this could have far-reaching implications into what we do in safety. Where people start using agents, it removes the human check part of that process. And, I just think that's going to be, in one respect, really powerful, but in another respect, really quite scary. Before I move on to the next section, just want to ask if there's any questions come in so far, Lauren.
No, nothing at the moment.
Well, that's a shame. Please ask away. Fire any questions you can at me. Otherwise, it's just going to be me talking, and I'd love to hear what you've all got to say about AI, how you're using it, how you find it interesting, what challenges you think it brings to safety, and, what concerns we should have as safety and risk professionals for this, I want to say, onslaught of AI into our profession. So let's talk about breaking down silos then. So this is one of the things that I think AI could be really good at in safety. Someone said to me a long time ago, to get better at safety, we need more accidents. And what they were trying to highlight is there's this paradox where, when we look at our check portion of Plan, Do, Check, Act, we look at our data sources, and our data are either leading or lagging indicators, lagging being the number of accidents. If we have no accidents, we think that our safety management system is fine until something very serious happens, at which point we realize that it's not fine. The paradox being that the better we get at safety, there's less data to actually work on to improve, and there's less, we have less data to go back and encourage people to spend more money on safety or do more until something serious happens. Now, to my mind, this is quite important, because the argument is then that we either have more accidents to improve safety, which clearly that's not the case. I'm not saying that. Or we learn to share data, and we learn to share and break down silos. But we can't share data. In fact, I've seen it so many times where you could have a number of safety leaders sitting around a table, and we could share anecdotal conversations. We could share a couple of one-line snippets, but we couldn't share like the real root cause analysis of accidents. And we can't share that for two reasons. One, there's commercial sensitivity and GDPR. No one wants to share where something's gone wrong. I've even seen it within construction projects where you've got a very large supply chain of multiple different contractors. They don't want to share where something's gone wrong because they run the risk of losing the contract. So they won't share the data. In that case, we all lose out because we lose out from that learning opportunity. And we also can't share it because of GDPR commercial sense, because of the names, dates of birth, who was involved, the company details, what happened. So again, no one wants to share that information, those lessons learned. When it comes to the leading indicators, we all have different taxonomy. We all use different terminology. We all have different things that we're recording, different wording, and we're all recording it on different platforms. Some companies, it may surprise you to learn, are still, and I've seen them, they're still using the old accident booklet, physical accident booklet in the first aid box, where they write in the details as part of, I don't know, off the top of my head, is it like a Social Security Act from the 1970s? Please, someone correct me if I got that wrong, by the way. But some people are using Excel and some are using various software systems. But my point is the data in silo on its own, we can't do anything with it. Because of that, we can't improve safety. To me, this is somewhere where AI can help. Because with AI, we can take relatively unstructured data, we can set rules around taxonomy and naming conventions. So you could work on something in your company that's named in a different way to how I would work, for example, in my company, and we can share that data in a completely anonymous way. AI can help to standardize that information, and from that, we can generate lessons learned and we can share them. Now, what that means is that I could have a company based in Japan digging a hole, and I could have a company based on the M4 corridor in South Wales digging a hole. Someone could have a lesson learned in Japan, and straight away we could share that lesson learned with the team on the M4. Different companies, different projects, different countries, different legislation, different guidance, completely different cultures. It doesn't matter. We could share that information almost instantly. At the moment, it's incredibly challenging. And even where we do share lessons learned, it's normally on a notice board or on an email. The other issue with the way that we share lessons learned now is that if I work for a company and I have, and by the way, I've seen this, so actually I'll give you a better example. Someone told me that that GWO have compiled an Excel spreadsheet of 15,000 lessons learned from wind turbines, right? I've seen this in a number of industries where they will compile lessons learned from one project and then hope to move it on to the next. By the time it moves on to the next project, they've implemented an entire new supply chain. So they've implemented new contractors, new project management, new everything. And then they go, here's 15,000 lessons learned in an Excel spreadsheet. Make sure you don't repeat those same mistakes again. How do we implement that? As a risk and safety manager, if someone gave me that, I'd go, okay, well, that's great, but what do I do with this? It's almost unusable. With AI, that data becomes usable, and that's what really excites me about what we're doing. So AI has the potential. It can be the bridge, it can structure and harmonize data, and it can help us share intelligence without breaching any of that privacy or confidentiality. Before I move on to the next slide, Lauren, any questions?
Yeah, so there's one sort of around how you've mentioned how rapidly obviously AI grows its knowledge. And the question is sort of where do you see the use of AI going in the next 5 years? Can you see us becoming over reliant and it causing more risks in the health and safety field?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Where can I see it going in the next 5 years? To Here's the thing on this, right? It's like, if I take it outside of what I'm doing in safety and I look at like the wider sphere of AI, I'm talking AI in Waze app on my phone that uses AI to tell me which way to go to work because which way is going to have the least traffic, right? AI on Netflix that tells me which film or TV show that I'm going to like based on what I've watched before. AI in Spotify. It's from that point of view, it's almost impossible to say where AI is going to go in the next 5 years. And in some respects, for me as a safety professional, I kind of think that it's not necessarily, I don't necessarily have to work that out. Organizations are adopting AI at a rapid pace. And I think BSI did a study on it the other day, and I want to say it was like 80 odd percent of boards believe that they'll be at a commercial disadvantage if they don't adopt wide scale AI across their organizations, right? That was a global survey. I want to say it was 89%. I'm hedging my bets. I'm bringing it down to 80 just because this is recorded. So from my point of view, then as a safety professional, it's not necessarily my job to decide whether I take on board AI or not. I just see it as this being an evolution of the workplace, and therefore it's my responsibility as a safety professional within the workplace to accept the operational improvement that AI can bring, but then to work constructively to evaluate the risk from AI to the organization and to individuals, and work out how we can help implement it effectively. In terms of the risk and safety, I think it's a really great question. I think in safety, we're afforded some protections. And I think one of the protections that we're afforded is that everything in safety comes down to a named individual or a responsible person. So if we take safety, right, there is a requirement to have a competent person. If we look at fire safety, it's a responsible person. Building safety now, it's a principal accountable person and an accountable person. There will always have to be a person that takes responsibility. We cannot devolve our responsibilities, and companies cannot devolve their responsibilities out to AI. AI, I don't think is there to cause a risk to the safety professional. I see it as a really intelligent peer review tool. It's something that can supplement, the software that we already use, not something that should take over. Will there be a risk? I think there could, but I don't necessarily think it will be to the safety professional. I think it will more likely be like the security risk of data when we started introducing safety software systems. For example, when we've made that change in the past to move from filing cabinets and lever arch files full of risk assessments, we now move them onto computer. When we move them onto computer, we put them in a folder and someone writes over them, and we've lost that risk assessment, that data, right? Because we haven't secured it correctly. And then we learn and we adapt and we go, okay, now we need to secure our documents in a more effective way. I think we can overcome that risk in that way. Any more, Lauren?
We have had a few more fly-ins since then, so I'll do another one for now, then we can carry on and do some more in a little while if you want. Somebody said, is there a way we can use AI but ensure that protected information is not shared anywhere else?
100%. Yes, right. So this is one of the reasons why I work with Inturity. So in Inturity, one of the biggest challenges with Inturity is actually ingesting data. So we've built our own ingestion system that we've built in-house with our developers, but also it was started off by IBM. We used to work with IBM, and the reason why is because that commercial sensitivity and that data is incredibly important. And what we do is we extract out of the information that we put in, right? So whether it's your company information, whether it's a spreadsheet of accidents, whether it's a risk assessment, whether it's policies, procedures, whether it's the HSE guides, it doesn't matter. We only extract out of that information hazards, risks, mitigations, and things to control risk and safety. So we do not extract company names, we do not extract individuals' names, we do not extract telephone numbers, dates of birth, email addresses. Because that information isn't extracted out, that data is then protected. So there is nothing that's commercially sensitive that's extracted from that, and that's the way to do it. One of the challenges with using an LLM is that I could pull a risk assessment. I could drag and drop a risk assessment now into ChatGPT, but all of that now, where does that data go, and how secure is that information? Now that means that we could use it for, I don't know, a local garage or my local shop. But if I'm installing nuclear modular reactors, I can't suddenly start pulling these risk assessments into DeepSeek, for example. It's just not going to work. And so that, I hope that answers your question in terms of commercial, in terms of the information security. Right. So one of the things I want to talk about is risk assessment. And I want to talk about risk assessment in relation to AI. And I've kind of had this bugbear of mine about risk assessment for a long period of time, right? Because they're a huge investment. We put so much money into the risk assessment process. So many companies will approach safety and say, have we got a risk assessment for that? Like the risk assessment, I always describe it as like the first and the last. I've had accidents on site. I've had the HSE come in. I've had the HSE do the thing where they set up the tape recording. You do not have to say anything, but it may arm your defense if you do not mention one question, someone which later rely on in court, and so on and so forth, right? We've all seen the bill on TV. And that process is incredibly daunting. But the first thing the HSE will ask for is the risk assessment. And when we look at the HSE's prosecution rate, a lot of the prosecutions, in fact, I would say the majority are based on whether the risk assessment is suitable and sufficient, because it's a really simple prosecution, right? It's really simple. And this is why the HSE have got a 96% successful prosecution rate. The risk assessment is either it's either covered the risk and the control measures satisfactorily or it hasn't. And it's black and white. But the risk assessment for me is so much more than this, because when I say to a company, right, what's your biggest hazard in your company? Every single time I see them do the same thing, and they'll go, oh, work from height. It's got to be work from height. Okay, well, what's your biggest risk? Well, work from height. But surely you control work from height because you know it's your biggest hazard, right? So because you know it's your biggest hazard, you put all your money or your focus into control measures for that hazard. And that means it shouldn't be your greatest risk anymore. It should be something else. You go, oh, probably fire then. And it's like, how do we not know this? This is something that really interests me. And I'm not, by the way, I put my hands up here. I'm not saying, well, I know it. I don't, because we haven't had the ability to extract the data to help us understand what it is. When I have risk assessments produced for a company, years ago, they used to sit in a lever arch folder in those little plastic wallets, and they'd be around the factory floor. And in fact, I worked for one company once, and I remember where the files were because they were underneath one of those boxes that said, open this to see who's responsible for your safety. And you had to open it, and there was a mirror in there. That's how long ago that was. And I'm pleased to say that we've moved on massively from there. But the point that I'm trying to make is that when we're looking at our hazards within an organization, all of our hazards are documented within our risk assessments, or they should be. And all of our control measures are documented within our risk assessments, or they should be. And from there, if I wanted to say, well, how much do we spend on PPE? How much PPE do we buy? Technically, I should be able to link back to a risk assessment and identify in the control measures actually what our PPE requirements are. That shouldn't be hard for me to do, but we haven't necessarily joined the dots yet. And it gets worse when we have contractors, because when we have contractors, they're all working on different standards, different approaches. Their risk assessments are produced to different policies. And then we put that in one complicated supply chain on one single construction project. And it's really hard to align all of that information. So I talked before about leading and lagging indicators being our source of data in safety. But the data, to me, the biggest source of data, risk data within any company, is the risk assessment. That risk assessment contains so much information of data that is just completely unused. And this is another area that I think AI is going to be revolutionary well, it already is. We're already seeing it. And it's just going to continue to get better over the next couple of years. And with that data, we can extract, we can pull out the hazards, we can identify the control measures, we can actually extract those from all of the data. We can actually start to group them into various categories to then undertake analysis. And that allows us to detect recurring risks, identify emerging trends, and then from that, we can even benchmark within our own organization and against other organizations where those, where our level of risks are and as an organization. Go on, Lauren. I'll defer to you for another question, please, if I may.
Yeah, of course. So someone said, how is AI helpful in managing dynamic risk environments? For example, hot work at oil and gas offshore platforms.
In terms of dynamic risk assessments, that's really interesting. So, yeah, okay. This is, by the way, I love this question because it's actually a difficult question, and it would be highly arrogant of me to sit there and go, well, oh yeah, I've done loads of hot works on offshore oil rig platforms. But I have worked in oil and gas for a short period of time, so I do understand, what you're referring to. But so at the moment, we've got a couple of types of risk assessment. We've obviously got our static risk assessments, which we produce, which we have to document, right? To me, those are those almost organizational risk assessments are the overarching risk assessments that feed into things like our dynamic risk assessments, dynamic that, we're undertaking that are much more reliant on the expertise of the individual undertaking the work to be able to spot any anomalies that fall outside of what would normally be expected. And that's that dynamism that comes in and the ability to stop work or halt it at the point that something is identified that's unusual. Can AI help with that? Potentially, yeah, it can. So when I mentioned before about AI integration into CCTV, AI can also be used I can see where AI is going to be used to control permits to work in the future, just because I think AI is going to be I think it's going to provide a better oversight when it comes to SIMOps, and simultaneous operations is one of the key points of the requirement for permit to work, where two different operations are going to come into conjunction. So, for example, someone that's undertaking the hot works doesn't know that something's going on behind them that could interact with what they're doing. Do I think AI could help with that in the future? Yes, I do. Do I think that would supersede that requirement for competence for the individual? No, I don't. But I do think that the AI could be, as I say, an intelligent oversight piece in that set of circumstance. The other thing that I think AI does very interestingly, so again, I'll refer to what we do with Intuity. So when a contractor submits a risk assessment into Intuity, the system will extract all of the key data from that. Then it will review the data against all of the available information in the system. And that information is siloed for the organization. So it'll be their policies, procedures, and processes, their lessons learned. Then it will review it against the authoritative guidance and legislation depending on which location it's in. If we're in the UK, it would be the HSE and UK legislation. Europe, it could be EU OSHA, for example. That process that you go through to review that risk assessment, it's not just about getting the best risk assessment, it's about educating the contractor or the person doing the work. Because at the point that the AI makes the recommendation, not only does it make the recommendation, it actually pulls out the relevant guidance and information and highlights that to the contractor that's undertaking the risk assessment. So again, it's that dynamic piece. I get you, like that's a challenge, and you can't necessarily overcome that without competence, but you can aid in that process by helping someone to build a better, documented risk assessment in the first place. I hope that answers that question, but well done. That's a tough question. Lauren, I'll go for one more if that's okay.
Yeah. So, is there a risk in poor quality AI responses or use? How do we maintain the quality or misuse? They've said, I assume the responsible person has a role, but what about clear policies and approved AI systems that can be used and those that can't?
100%. I love this question because this links into the wider risk portion of IRSM, right? It's, risk and safety management. What is a risk to an organization at the moment? It's organizations that sit there and go, shall we use AI or shall we not? And one of the things that I've said before is because I promise you, your staff are already using AI, whether you like it or not. So if you don't have the governance in place, that clear governance, that clear structure, that clear policy, process, procedure, whatever you want, and even go as far as to have sort of authorized and permitted AI tools that are allowed within the company and have clear documented guidance on what isn't allowed to be used for certain circumstances. Ultimately, as a company, I think that's a risk. And I think we're introducing risk within our organization that we don't have to. Just as like an example of an AI tool, Waze, for example, I use Waze to get me around. It's the advanced Google Maps on my phone app. I wouldn't go to ChatGPT and say, can you give me step-by-step navigation from here into London, for example? But I would use that. I would use Waze to do that. Both are AI tools, both do a very different thing. So I think within safety, there are some phenomenal AI tools out there that are coming through that have been made, crafted, created. And the difference with the tools that have been created for the safety profession is that they can only pull data from safety documentation and approved resources in safety. That's the difference between using ChatGPT and the difference between, for example, using Intuity or Safety AI, Navitec or Protex, or any of the companies that you see coming through that have put a lot of time and effort into making sure that the accuracy of the information they provide is absolutely as good as it can be compared to ChatGPT. Right, so I'll move on to the next section then, and this is another area where I think AI is really going to help us, right? I wrote a piece for Sentinel magazine that came out last month. By the way, I tried to put loads of humor in it, but a lot of it was taken out. So I guess my humor isn't necessarily publishing worthy. Maybe it was too close to the bone, but anyway, the point is that I wrote this piece for Sentinel magazine, and it refers back to an experience that I had when I was in a boardroom asking for investment. And I sat around the table, and just before me, there was a digital marketing manager, social media. And I must admit, I always sat there in the office, and I looked over at the safety team. There's like a couple of people. We're always stretched. We always wanted more resources. And I kept looking over at the social media team, and they were like, 6, 7, 8 people. And I just couldn't understand why social media seemed to have so much more investment than safety. It just never made any sense to me. And digital marketing went before me in the boardroom, sat and said, oh, we need X amount of £1,000 for more social media advertising. And the questions started coming in from the board. What's the reach? What's the click-through rate? How many conversions are we expected to get? And ultimately, what is the ROI going to be? And I was up next, and their funding was approved, and my turn. I need X amount of £1,000 for this safety initiative. I sold the benefits. I went through my slide deck. I compared it to other companies that we know that use the same platform, keep up with industry trends, reduction in accidents. I put all of this information forward, and they said the same thing. How do we quantify success? Well, we can reduce accidents and we can do this and we can improve. No, quantify. Give me the numbers. Oh, crikey. Okay, well, look, we'll reduce accidents. Well, what is the anticipated percentage reduction in the number of accidents? What are the operational benefits aside from safety? And ultimately, what is the ROI? And I was sat there thinking, this is brutal because in safety, we don't tend to work like this. Like, this is not what I was used to. And, I just found myself pulling out anecdotes like, well, you can't put a price on safety after all. And, these, I want to say tropes that we use, like, well, if you think safety is expensive, try having an accident, and I was just grasping at straws. They wanted cold, hard facts. And this has always been a source of consternation because if I put this out on LinkedIn, I promise you a load of people will say, well, look, you can't have cold, hard facts in safety. This is not, this is not our industry. But there is a science behind this. When I put my tail between my legs and walked out, the company that I work for, they used to, when you work for them, you had to do a mandatory 2-day Myers-Briggs personality course. And what's more, they actually made the results public. So for everyone in the company, they actually shared the results of the Myers-Briggs. The personality types, the red, blue, yellow, green. Guess who were the blues? The blues, for if you don't know, in the personality types, they're the data-driven ones. They're the ones that want the numbers. The blues, the board. The board every time, 89% blue, 90% blue. All they wanted was the numbers and the data. And the most analytical of them were the people that held the purse strings, the financial directors, the CFOs. They were the ones that really wanted the numbers. And in safety, I couldn't give them the numbers. So to me, this is a real opportunity for AI. That with what we do, we often tend to fall back on like the moral arguments, the legal arguments. We can quote the law all day long, but in terms of the financial argument, in terms of measurable, quantifiable impact, it's really hard for us to get that right. And this is huge, and I feel like we're missing a trick. I read a study a little while ago, and it was cited by the Construction Safety Research Alliance over in Colorado, and they were doing a research piece on the ROI of safety, and they cited this piece of research. And when I read it, they studied the safety spend within one company. The safety spend within that company amounted to 7% of the total turnover of that company. 7% of turnover. And I thought, well, how can we calculate ROI without a clear financial picture, right? Safety spend is fragmented. For example, an LRA, Legionella Risk Assessment, will come out of one budget. The water that's flushed during water flushing comes out of another budget. The staff time taken to undertake the flushing comes out of another budget. The consultant providing the training to teach the person how to flush the water comes out of another budget. So we never actually see the total value. I genuinely believe that AI is going to help us to work out the total value of what we spend on safety based on the control measures in the risk assessment. And I think we're going to have that within the next couple of years. And now in this computer screen, you can see some of the dashboards that we can produce with AI. So I know it's a little blurred and squished, so you'll have to use a bit of creativity to see it. But what we can do is we can actually pull out heat maps of risk based on submitted risk assessments within organizations. And from that, it gives you an operational oversight, a really clear oversight to a board, to an operations director, actually where their risks are within an organization. Now, I'll just explain this very briefly. Smaller the pie, the smaller is indicative of the size of the project based on the number of risk assessments submitted. And then the color of the pie indicates whether the risk assessments have been rejected, they've been expired, or whether they've been approved, or whether they're waiting for approval. For example, up here in Scotland, that indicates to me that there's a bottleneck in the system. There's an awful lot of projects there where all risk assessments have expired or they've been rejected. Is that an indication of a risk within the supply chain? Is it an internal risk? What are we doing? But again, this is the sort of power of the data that AI can start to give us, rather than just taking risk assessments that are, back in a LeverArch folder. And then from that, we can actually start to quantify the efficacy of what we're doing in safety throughout our supply chain. We can evaluate the safety performance of contractors as well. So, as I've said before, AI isn't going to replace safety professionals, right? I don't see AI in that way. I think the law is protective of us for that reason. But I do see AI as a real-time peer reviewer, and I do think it gives access to data that we've never had before. And I think we can use that data to really elevate. I've used that word. I sound like AI now, because AI always uses buzzwords like elevate. So if I can put a rocket ship emoji after that, that'll make a great LinkedIn post. But I think it can really elevate what we do in terms of safety, in terms of our ability to communicate at a data-driven level, which to me is almost at a board level within an organization. I think that really pushes us as risk and safety professionals. And I think AI is going to become like any other tool, like Excel or Word, and I wouldn't try and manage an estate of properties now on paper with a LeverArch folder. I wouldn't do it without a software system, and I can see AI becoming exactly the same thing. To me, it's about collaboration. This is where I see the power of AI is actually in collaboration. It's about sharing data. It's about having data flowing across regions, sites, and supply chains. It's about sharing learning instantly, and it's about not losing that learning, because at the moment we see so many cases where someone's had an accident, but 2-3 years ago that company had the same accident previously. They just forgot that it ever happened. I see AI as a supportive tool, and I see AI in safety as something that's so good that you don't even realize that you're using it. Just like you don't realize that Netflix is using an AI algorithm to recommend shows to you. You're just happy to watch the show, right? That for me is where AI is going to excel in safety, not where you use a prompt box and type in, will you write me a risk assessment? Just something where you're undertaking that process of writing a risk assessment. It goes, hang on, have you thought about this? Because someone was just digging a hole in Japan and they just had this accident. That could be helpful for you. That's where I think AI is going to be in the next few years. So that's it for me.